Our gospel lesson is Matthew chapter 22, verses 1 through 14. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who prepared a wedding banquet for his son. He sent his servants to those who had been invited to the banquet to tell them to come, but they refused to come. Then he sent some more servants and said, 'Tell those who have been invited that I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and fatted cattle have been butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding banquet.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his field, another to his business. The rest seized his servants, mistreated them, and killed them. The king was enraged. He sent his army and destroyed those murderers and burned their city. Then he said to his servants, 'The wedding banquet is ready, but those I invited did not deserve to come. Go to the street corners and invite to the banquet anyone you find.' So the servants went out into the streets and gathered all the people that they could find, both good and bad, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he noticed a man there who was not wearing wedding clothes. 'Friend,' he asked, 'how did you get in here without wedding clothes?' The man was speechless. Then the king told the attendants, 'Tie him hand and foot and throw him outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. For many are invited, but few are chosen.'" The word of the Lord. You may be seated. This Old Testament message that you read, it's in concert with the gospel reading, and it portrays visions of a gracious and inclusive God. God is making preparations in both passages and inviting us to come, preparing for us ahead of time. So the gospel text also concurs in the context of Jesus' last week of his ministry. And so some of the learned men and the chief priests and the elders and all, they were steady trying to trip Jesus up on something. And so they demanded from him, say, "Well, tell us, by what authority are you doing all of these things that you do? And by what authority are you talking to people the way that you talk to them and saying what you will give if they will follow you? Who are you? Who do you think you are?" And so, Jesus was very cool, not like us and fly off the handle. But he said, he responded to them in 3 parables. So the text that we're using today is from this final parable of the 3. This passage is very noteworthy of God's gracious and sweeping invitation. The invitation is to us also. The slaves of the king, they were instructed to go out and invite everyone. But the parable sort of gives us a twofold judgment. First, on the invited guests, and then on the one who entered without the proper clothing. So it's very important that we get the message that we need to be dressed for the occasion. And as such, it speaks not only to the original questioners, but also to Matthew's audience and to us. The parable is speaking to us today. So, and the parable shows several questions. What is the nature of the invitation? What does it mean to accept the invitation? And I thought it was just very heartwarming to hear the young disciples say, yes, they would read the invitation and then they would get ready to go. No questions asked. What is the appropriate clothing? Because if you're going to a beach party, you're not going to wear a tuxedo or an evening gown. Although I had a lady tell me one time, she said, if you really want to be important, or no, not important, she said, well, yes, or the person, I'm losing what she said. Yes. If you want to be the center of attraction, it wouldn't come to me. She said, if you really want to be the center of attraction, she said, if you're invited to a beach party, wear an evening gown. She said, and everybody's eyes will be on you, and they will be talking about you. She said, just be different. If they tell you to, if you're going to the races, and you're going to be driving in the race, she said, well, instead of a race car, she said, you come with a wagon. And you'll be the center of attraction because everybody will be wondering what is wrong. So, but where are these garments? What's the appropriate clothing? You're going to dress appropriately according to the invitation of the type of the party. And where do you find such garments? If we don't have them already, if we really want to answer the invitation, be a part of the celebration or the party, we will go to town, to the thrift stores, or to the mall, or wherever, to purchase the right outfit. Isn't that true? Because we want to be a part of the crowd. So how do you put them on? You're going to get something that fits, not something that doesn't fit. And then what does it mean to say many are called but few are chosen? Not everyone gets, you may be called but are out there, but you may not be chosen to receive the invitation to come to the party. So dressed for the party, that's a fashion statement. We dress for the party, dress for the occasion, we dress for success. We all like to be on the best dress list, and we hear all the time about clothes makes the man, and the woman too. And you're either dressed up or dressed down. Our language, the language that we use, is full of images about the way we're clothed. The color, the fabric, the cut, the style, the unofficial uniform, or the power suit of the workplace. What we choose to wear says something about what we do, how we see ourselves, or how we want others to see us. Isn't that true? So it is no surprise that from the fig leaf of Genesis to the white robes of Revelation, from Joseph's robe of many colors to the garment of Jesus for which the Roman soldiers cast lot, the Bible too speaks about clothing and being dressed for the occasion. So it's true for today's passage as well. Matthew records that Jesus told this story, the parable of the wedding feast, during his last days of his earthly ministry, as I had already mentioned. And it was told, he told it in response to the questions he had been asked, because the chief priest and all of the higher-ups, they were always trying to confuse him. And it was just stupid on their part, because how could you confuse Jesus? But they didn't know him well enough to know that they couldn't. So the parable is really important because it tells us something about God, what God is like and what God expects. It also tells us something about ourselves. So for our listeners, then and now, It's a parable of hope and a parable of judgment for us too. This story offers a message of hope because of its radical inclusiveness to the offer. The invitation to the party was first sent to a few and not presented to all. But now it's presented to all of us. We all have Jesus' invitation. But it's up to us as to whether we want to accept it. And there's no restrictions. Jesus said, come. Just come. So no matter which highway or byway we find ourselves on, no matter what marketplace we're working in, or there's a place at the table for you and me. It's not, we don't have to worry about standing outside. Well, you know, it's already full. There's room for each and every one of us at Jesus' table. But it's up to us to accept the invitation and get dressed for the occasion. The parable also speaks of the awesome freedom that God has given us. We have been given an invitation, a choice to come to the party, to be in fellowship with God. We can either accept it or we can reject it. The text tells us up front that not everyone will accept. And isn't that true of us today? We can preach sermon after sermon. We can send out all types of announcements of what's going on at church, and everyone is invited, or to Bible study, to fellowship dinner, or just whatever. But not everyone will accept. But the invitation is out there. So, because we get wrapped up in our own affairs, and we have our own agendas, and so we don't take the time to accept the invitation that Jesus gives. But there's something else about this invitation. It's not forced on you. You're not forced to come. You're invited to come. But you have a choice whether to say, I accept or I reject. So there are serious consequences, though, for rejection. And that is part of the judgment that's inherent in the story. But the option of saying no is a real one. And so we make that choice. God gave us free choice, free will. And so, of course, there's also an issue of what to wear. And to come to God's party, or the party that Jesus invites us to, it's not necessarily going out and purchasing an outfit. But it's what we put on in here. How are we looking at? Are we dressed for the occasion in our hearts? This lady told a story, and she said she and her husband were married during the closing years of the Vietnam War, and the draft was still in effect, and said, she said, barring some compelling reason, if you had a low number, you were going to be called into service. So after her husband finished college, he went into the army, and she said she remembered him coming home on one of the days after he had enlisted and he came in with several different types of uniforms. She said he had combat boots, dress shoes, a variety of hats and, outfits. And she said they all were olive green. And she said the uniform of the day was selected by someone higher up. They didn't select their own uniforms, if you get the picture. They were told what to wear. But we don't have to be, we have the choice of selecting our own uniform. But just make sure it's the right uniform. Because Jesus said, come and dress for the occasion. Okay? And so we clean up within our hearts, and we dress up the heart and then we come to the party. And so just like members of the military in the parable of the wedding feast, it suggests that those of us who have been called by God and accept God's invitation, that our uniform is not determined by the cut of clothes or whether we have on slacks or we have on a skirt or dress or suit or whatever. But our uniform can be seen by the way that we act as Christians. Putting on the whole armor of God. And that is up to us, how we want to dress for the occasion. So in order to remain at the party, we're obligated to take off our old lifestyle and put on a new uniform of grace. And that's characterized, that uniform is characterized by the love of God. And so this is a way of clothing our hearts and minds that bespeaks a new status and a new role for us when we're dressed in God's uniform and we're ready to attend the party. We are expected to take on, to put on the character of Jesus, and who is our heavenly parent, our God, our Father. And that's the uniform, the wedding robe that God expects to see on us. It's a changed life, a life committed to Him. And then we say, well, where are such garments to be found? And how does one put them on? Well, just as the invitation to the party comes from God, so does the clothing of grace. The clothing of grace comes from God. It's a creation of God that is designed and manufactured by God Himself. It is God's work that is effected within our willing hearts and minds. To put on such garments requires two things: saying yes and accepting the ongoing process of transformation, of being conformed to the image of Christ, of being transformed by the renewing of our minds and of our hearts. Are we willing to do that? So it is with the text that tells us many are called, but few are chosen. So what does that mean? I think it means that there are those who hear the call of God, who get the invitation, but who refuse to take it seriously. They come for the party, but they refuse to stay for the cleanup afterward. That may be a little humorous because we've experienced that, haven't we? We have some that will come, they will say, I think we should do this, and I think we should do it this way, and I don't think we should use disposables. I think we should use our china and the flatware and glassware. We should do it like that. And so, yes, we put all of that out, and we have the party, and then everybody's gone. And it does not work that way. If we come to the party and dress for the occasion and we're ready to party, we need to take a part in the cleanup. We set the party up, we take it down. There are people that want the benefits, but not the obligations. So make no mistake about it. There are obligations. There's a tension, a paradox in this parable, because while it tells us that everyone is invited, it also tells us that not every response to the invitation is acceptable. We must have open hearts and minds. We must believe, and we must be willing to suffer with Christ. And also a part of this, there is a judgment that's inherent in this story. If we do not, the wedding feast offers both good news and bad. The good news is that there is a party and you're invited. The bad news, if one considers it such, is that there's a dress requirement. Oh, and one more thing. Has God got an awesome wardrobe for you if you accept? In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.